These slides will take you through just a brief introduction review of what it means to be a migrant worker to prepare us for our introduction to the story of mice and men. As you learned in your research about migrant workers in your work packet, obviously there was different ways that people were experiencing that lifestyle. In some cases you had gentlemen who chose to do that as their career as they moved from farm to farm, and then later with the Great Depression, obviously that migrant worker really became more of a family unit that was traveling just for survival and trying to find work during the Dust Bowl when they lost their farms, and traveling toward California in order to find work on the many farms that were still thriving in California. California did not experience the drought that was happening in the Midwest. So while the Midwestern farms were failing, certain parts of the country, especially on the West Coast, were thriving agriculturally, and that's why all these families and these workers were moving into California. But to keep it more specific to our story, I just want to review a few things with you. You'll notice on the intro slide here that you see a picture of some of the kind of spontaneous living quarters that people built to keep their families or themselves with a roof over their head while they were looking for work. The other is an actual poster that the government put out for their programs to help line up workers with opportunity in California and other farms around the country. So that's just a kind of a point of history there. This is a picture of a gentleman cooking outside at one of the camps that he made. Now in this particular situation, he obviously wasn't living in the quarters provided to the migrant workers at a farm. He might have been one of those individuals who actually didn't have a formal relationship or arrangement made with a farm in the community, but rather was traveling around the countryside, California specifically, looking for work. And this is one of the makeshift camps that they could live in if they didn't in fact have an arrangement already with a farm. Migrant workers obviously were used to plant and to harvest and to take care of crops. So this is before all the technology created the significant farm machinery that did a lot of the work. So humans were doing a lot of work on the farm manually by hand. Between the 1880s and the 1930s, this is where thousands of men would travel countryside in search of work, and this was part of their career. And this is the situation that we see in Of Mice and Men. Migrant worker information. Now this is not only the migrant workers that were moving to the arranged work sites that they had, but as we see more families moving into California, we see the wages decrease. So at some point we have migrant workers who would earn between $2.50 or $3 an hour. I'm sorry, per day, not an hour. $2.50 or $3 per day, plus they would have their food and shelter, and we see that in Of Mice and Men. However, during the 1930s, after the Dust Bowl and with the Depression, the unemployment rate was so high in the United States, over 25%, and so many farmers were hit by that unemployment rate that many more men were out searching for work to provide for their families. That's when these government agencies were set up to even assist more people in finding work on farms. California in particular had used to advertise to bring more migrant workers into the state to support them with their agricultural needs, but eventually they found themselves overwhelmed by up to 7,000 new migrants a month, more migrants than they needed. So you had 7,000 migrant workers coming in, more than what they had supply for. So for a long time, several months in 1936, the Los Angeles Police Department actually sent over 136 deputies to the state lines to turn back any migrants who arrived that didn't have any money. Bordering states like Arizona and other states were actually angry that California was trying to, quote, dump their hobos back on them. And eventually the police were returned to Los Angeles, but the migrants just kept coming because they were surviving, right? They were trying to survive and provide for their families, but it did create contention. There are many phenomenal photos taken from the Great Depression. Dorothea Lange is a famous photographer who took photos of the working conditions, especially during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, when so many families were living in these makeshift camps, trying to provide for their families, keeping a roof over their head, if you will, and get work to provide for them. And we'll take a look at some of those photos just to set some of the scene for you. This should conclude your note-taking for the migrant worker setup portion of your note sheet.